Modim Simcha Rabotai. We're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Kilayim. We're up to Perek Zayin Mishna Aleph. As an introduction to the Mishnah Rabotai, we're going to introduce a new concept called havracha. Now, one way of growing a new grapevine is through a method known as layering, which is havracha. You bury a branch of an existing grapevine in the ground and bring it back up from the ground a little distance away. The branch eventually becomes a new vine. So the Mishnah now is going to discuss planting other species above the buried branch. If somebody he buried an existing branch, a grapevine, in the ground, the halacha is like this: if there is not at least 3 tvachim of earth on top of that branch, you cannot plant seed directly on it. Why? Because the roots of the new plant are likely to go into the buried branch. That's going to be a prohibition of grafting other species onto a grapevine. The Mefashim do point out that we only have this concern regarding a grapevine. Why? Since the branches are soft and it can be penetrated by the roots. Other trees, the branches are harder, and a seed of another species can be planted above a buried branch. Now, our Mishnah is speaking specifically of planting other species more than 6 tvachim away from the trunk of the original vine. Why? Because within 6 tvachim, we know already, you can't plant the species regardless. Like we learned in the beginning of last parak. Even if you layered the branch through a gourd or a pipe, meaning you enclose the branch through a pipe, as long as there is less than 3 tvachim of earth above the branch, we have a concern that the roots can go through the pipe, through the gourd, and then into the buried branch of the vine. Now, what is a gourd? A gourd is basically the food item whose seeds were removed, and it becomes similar to a hollow pipe. Now, obviously, we're talking about a gourd that's dried out. Otherwise, even if there was no vine there, it would be considered Kilayim, forbidden grafting, when the roots of the other species go into the gourd. So obviously talking about when it's dried out. If however you layered it through a rock, even if there is only 3 finger breadths of earth on top of it, you can plant other seeds directly above it. And Mefashim explain, if the branch is enclosed in a solid rock, which basically cannot be penetrated by the roots of another plant, you are allowed to plant other species above the branch. You can't use, the Rav says, soft rock, because that can be penetrated by the roots. Here you don't have to have 3 tvachim of earth between the other seed and the branch. Even if the branch is only 3 finger breadths beneath the surface of the ground, you still will be allowed to plant in this manner. You don't even really have to have, the Mefashim point out, you don't really need to have even 3 finger breadths between the other species in the vine, but anything less than that would not be suitable for planting. So basically we're giving the common case of having 3 finger breadths of dirt upon it. Now, the Mishnah concludes by saying when you plant in the area of a grapevine, the new plant we know has to be distant 6 tvachim from the vine, which we call it its work area. Now, the Mishnah is going to discuss a vine that's bent sideways and continues along the ground before turning upward. That's, if you could see again in the art school illustrated diagram, basically you have a first trunk and you have a second trunk. You have it planted in one area and then it bends, extends toward the ground and then comes up again. So the Mishnah says like this: if there is a knee in the grapevine, and the Mefashim explained the vine is growing in a knee-shaped form, meaning when it comes up from the ground, it bends sideways and then continues along the ground. Then it turns and rises upwards, taking the shape of a bent knee. Again, if you could see in the diagram, it'll be clear. If there is a knee in a grapevine, we measure only from the second trunk, meaning that part that already sticks out of the ground, not the original trunk of the vine, meaning where it first came out of the ground. And the Mefashim explain, we consider the point where it begins its second rise, meaning the second trunk, to be the base of the vine. So the 6 tvachim are measured from that point instead of the point where it first came up from the ground. Now the Mefashim point out, this is only true if the trunk of the vine is not visible. So the second one looks to be the spot where the vine was planted. If the original trunk of the vine is visible and recognizable as the place where the vine was planted, then the 6 tvachim have to be distance measured from the original trunk. The reason we're going by the second trunk in general is because we're assuming the first one is not visible and people think that the second one coming out of the ground is really the first one. If the first one is visible, then obviously we would do 6 tvachim from there. Again, Rabotai, if you could see the diagram, it'll help out a lot. That is in Rabotai of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet now, as an introduction, we know as a rule, grain and various other types of greens cannot be planted within 6 tvachim of a grapevine. We also know that when a grapevine is arranged in a certain manner, it becomes a vineyard, and that now has a stricter requirement of having to separate other species a distance of 4 amot. So if it's just an individual grapevine, grains and vegetables have to be 6 tvachim away, distance, new grain or vegetables. If it's a certain grapevines that are lined in a certain manner, like we learned earlier, then it becomes a vineyard. Now it has to be distance 4 amot. One of the conditions that you need for vines to combine to become a vineyard is there has to be at least 2 rows of vines that are from 4 to 8 amot apart from each other. The Mishnah now is going to explain how can we have this by a layered grapevine. If a person layers the branches of a row of 3 grapevines, making a second row of vines, again, Rabotai, if you could see in the diagram, basically you have 1 row of 3 grapevines, and on each grapevine you took the branch, stuck it in the ground, and it came out a little distant data from the top, so now you have 2 rows. The ikarem nir'im, and the trunks of the first row are visible, meaning even though the branches of the original vines are buried in the ground, you could still see the trunks. Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok says, if there is a distance of 4 amot to 8 amot between the rows, they combine to become a vineyard. And the Mefarshim explain, even though the new vine is still connected to the parent vine and drawing nourishment from its roots, because again, that's where the branch is coming from, it's still considered a second independent row, according to Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok. Therefore, the two rows, combined to make a vineyard, and now you have to distance other species 4 amot away from them. And the Mefarshim do point out, the Rav says that they're going to be considered a vineyard even if only 2 of the 3 vines were layered. Why? Because that's the minimum arrangement. We know we learned earlier, 2 vines facing 2 vines, and one sticking out like a tail. That was earlier in chapter 4, Mishnah 6. Now the Mishnah speaks about another case. The Mishnah continues, Harelu mistarfot, right? Ve'im lav enan mistarfot. But if not, meaning if the 2 rows are less than 4 amot or more than, less than 4 amot or more than 8 amot apart from each other, they do not combine to make a vineyard. They're considered individual vines, and that you only have to distance if you want to plant other species 6 tvachim. So again, Rabotai, just to conclude Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok's opinion, if it's between 4 to 8 amot from each other, then they combine to make a vineyard. You have to separate 4 amot. If it's less than 4 amot or more than 8 amot apart from each other, then it's considered individual vines, and you need to separate only 6 tvachim. The Mishnah continues, Gefen she'apsha. If a grapevine had dried up and died, asura v'ena mikadeshet, it is still forbidden to plant other seeds in its work area because people think that it's a live vine that only lost its leaves. However, nevertheless, if other seed was planted there, it would not prohibit the produce. And the Mefarshim do point out, if you look at the Rav, that the Torah does not prohibit planting near a dead vine. However, even a live vine loses its leaves in the fall, sometimes even in the summer. Therefore, the Chachamim prohibited planting near a dead vine throughout the year because they had a fear maybe people will think that the vine is live vine. It's a live vine that lost its leaves. Now we give people the thought that we're planting Kilayim. Therefore, that is asur. You're not allowed to plant near the dried grapevine that died. However, if you did plant it, it will not prohibit the produce, meaning if the other seeds were planted in the work area of the dried out vine, the produce does not become forbidden for benefit as Kilayim of the vineyard, because the prohibition against planting is only D'Rabbanan, like we just said, not D'Oraita, and the rabbis say that it's only Asur Lechatchila, but B'diavad it will not prohibit the produce that you grew from such a mixture. Now, Rabotai, the Mishnah concludes, we learned in Mishnah Aleph just now that you're not allowed to plant other seeds directly above the buried branch of the vine when you do the layering. Why? Because the roots of the plants will likely go into the branch, which will be considered grafting a plant onto a tree. The Mishnah concludes with halakha that is related. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok omer mishmo. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says in the name of Rabbi Meir, Af an gabei hagefen asur ve'eno mekadesh. So too, above the grapevine, you are not allowed to plant other seeds, but it does not prohibit the produce that grows afterwards. And the Mefarshim explain, Rabotai, Just to go back, I skipped a line in the Mishnah. Just to go back. Gefen she'avsha asura v'ena mekadeshet. If a grapevine dried up and died, it is forbidden to plant other seeds in that work area because people are going to get confused and think it's a live vine that lost its leaves. However, if you did plant other seeds, it does not prohibit the produce. I have to continue in the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir says, Af tzemer gefen, so too the same by a cotton plant. Asur ve'eno mekadesh, it is forbidden to plant other seeds in the work area. Why? Since a cotton plant is similar to a grapevine. However, it will not prohibit the produce of a seed that was planted. And the Mepharshim explain that a cotton plant resembles a grapevine. If a person were to plant near a cotton plant, people are going to think the cotton plant is really a grapevine and then think that the person's planting within the work area of a grapevine. However, again, therefore the Chachamim ideally said it's asur. However, again, since it's only D'Rabbanan, the Chachamim were lenient b'diavad to benefit from it. I skipped that line that was part of the Mishnah. Now, back to what we were saying, that again, we learned earlier in Mishnah Aleph, they are not allowed to plant other seeds directly above a buried branch of a vine because the roots of the plant are going to go through into the branch, violating grafting a plant onto a tree. The Mishnah concludes, Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok Omer Mishmo, Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok says in the name of Rabbi Meir, just like by the cotton it's asur, so too by a grapevine. Above a grapevine it's forbidden to plant other seeds, but it will not prohibit the produce that grows afterwards. And the Mepharshim explain, unlike Kilayim of a vineyard, when we know that the produce will become asur, the prohibition of grafting does not prohibit the produce. Basically, the whole time we were speaking about the produce becoming asur, that's when you do kilayim, mixtures. But here, when we're talking about grafting, Rabbi Eliezer says in the name of Rabbi Meir, you're not allowed to plant above the grapevine. But if you did, the produce will not become asur. Again, the Rab does tell us that halacha is not like Rabbi Meir and not like Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok, who said in his name that halacha follows the Tana Kama. That is the end of Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Sorry for the skipping that paragraph. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.